The Beverly Wilshire Hotel stood like a monument to old Hollywood glamour on the night of October 18th, 1968. Its grand ballroom had been transformed into something beyond elegant, beyond exclusive. Crystal chandeliers hung from a vaulted ceiling like frozen fireworks, each one worth more than most people made in a year. The walls were draped in deep burgundy velvet, and 20 round tables surrounded a central stage where a jazz quartet played standards so smoothly you could barely hear them over the champagne-fueled conversations. This wasn't just any party. This was a celebration of what industry insiders were calling the deal of the decade, an $800 million partnership between Constellation Films, a rising production company, and mysterious investment group that had remained completely silent throughout months of negotiations. The money was real, the contracts were signed, and tonight was meant to be the grand reveal, the moment when Hollywood's elite would finally meet the faceless financier who'd made it all possible. The guest list read like a who's who of 1960 cinema. Studio executives in custom tuxedos, producers whose names appeared on every marquee in America, actresses dripping in diamonds that caught the chandelier light and threw rainbows across the room, directors who'd won Oscars, agents who'd made fortunes. And at the center of it all, standing on that stage with the confidence of someone who believed the world had finally recognized their brilliance, were Gerald and Patricia Hammond. Gerald Hammond was the director and co-founder of Constellation Films. He was 42, tall and angular, with slick back hair and a jaw that looked like it had been carved for close-ups. He wore a white dinner jacket, unconventional for the era, because Gerald Hammond didn't follow conventions. He set them. Or at least that's what he told everyone who'd listen. Patricia Hammond, his wife of 8 years, stood beside him in a gown that cost more than most cars. Gold silk that hugged every curve, with emeralds at her throat and wrists that had belonged to some European countess. She was 35, blonde, beautiful in the calculated way of women, who understood that beauty was currency and had invested wisely. She held a glass of Chateau Margaux 1961, one of the finest wines in the world, and she held it like a scepter. They surveyed the room like monarchs surveying their kingdom. This was their night, their triumph. For years, they clawed their way up through Hollywood's brutal hierarchy. They'd smiled at people they hated. They'd made promises they never intended to keep. They'd stepped on backs and burned bridges, and done whatever it took to get here, to this moment, to this ballroom full of people who finally had to respect them. The $800 million partnership wasn't just about money. It was about legitimacy. It was about power. It was about Gerald Hammond becoming the kind of producer who could greenlight projects with a phone call, and Patricia Hammond becoming the kind of woman who got invited to Kennedy parties. They'd spent months working with lawyers and financiers, negotiating with an investment group that communicated only through representatives. They'd never met the actual investor. They'd been told he valued privacy. They'd been told he preferred to stay behind the scenes. They'd assumed he was probably some old money East Coast type, some inheritance kid who'd never worked a day in his life, someone who needed their Hollywood expertise to turn his boring money into something glamorous. The Hammonds weren't worried about him. Why would they be? They had the talent. They had the vision. They had the control. The investor was already in the room. Dean Martin arrived at the Beverly Wilshire at 8:47 p.m., 13 minutes after the official start time. He came alone. No publicist. No manager. No entourage of assistants and hangers-on. Just Dean in a perfectly tailored dark suit, crisp white shirt, simple black tie, and shoes polished to a mirror shine. He walked with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his entire adult life in the spotlight, but had never let it change the fundamental truth of who he was. Dean was 51 years old that October night. He'd been famous for more than 2 decades. He'd sung with Jerry Lewis and Frank Sinatra. He'd starred in movies that made millions. He'd headlined in Vegas so many times that his name was practically part of the neon. He'd built an empire, not through flash and bombast, but through quiet competence and an understanding of how power actually worked in Hollywood. Most people knew Dean Martin, the performer, the singer with the velvet voice, the comedian with perfect timing, the Rat Pack member who made drinking look cool and effortlessness look easy. But very few people knew about Dean Martin, the businessman, the investor who'd quietly built a portfolio of real estate, production companies, and entertainment ventures. The strategist who understood that real power didn't come from being the loudest voice in the room, but from owning the room itself. When Dean walked into the Beverly Wilshire that night, he wasn't there to perform. He wasn't there to be recognized. He was there because he owned 49% of the investment group that had just partnered with Constellation Films for $800 million. He was there because this was his deal, his money, his risk, but he'd structured it so his name appeared nowhere in the paperwork. He'd learned long ago that the best way to see who people really were was to meet them when they didn't know they should be impressed. The lobby of the Beverly Wilshire was all marble and gold, with bellhops in crisp uniforms and guests arriving in couples and groups, laughing and air-kissing, and checking their reflections in every shiny surface. Dean walked past them, heading toward the grand staircase that led up to the ballroom. That's when the first moment of disrespect happened. A security guard stepped in front of him. Young guy, maybe 25, with a clipboard and an earpiece and the kind of self-importance that comes from being given a tiny amount of authority. He looked Dean up and down, not recognizing him, seeing only a man arriving alone without the trappings of obvious wealth or status. "Excuse me, sir," the guard said, his tone just a shade too familiar, too casual for how he should address anyone at an event like this. "Are you with the catering staff? Service entrance is around back." Dean stopped. He didn't bristle. He didn't get angry. He simply pulled an embossed invitation from his inside jacket pocket and held it out. The guard took it, read it, and his face went slightly pink. "Oh, sorry about that. Go ahead." No real apology for the assumption. No embarrassment at having mistaken a guest for hired help. Just a quick correction and a dismissive wave. Dean pocketed the invitation and continued up the stairs. The interaction told him everything he needed to know about the crowd he was about to join. The ballroom doors were open, spilling golden light and the soft sound of jazz into the hallway. Dean walked in and nobody noticed. Not at first. The room was too full of people looking at other people, measuring status, calculating connections, playing the eternal Hollywood game of who matters and who doesn't. Dean moved through the crowd toward the bar. He walked at his own pace, unhurried, observing. A woman in diamonds glanced at him, then looked away, uninterested. A producer Dean had actually financed 2 films for walked right past him without a flicker of recognition. A young actress literally bumped into him, then turned to see who'd been in her way, saw someone she didn't consider important, and moved on without apologizing. At the bar, a man in an expensive suit physically cut in front of Dean, not even acknowledging his presence. The man ordered champagne, loud and confident, making sure everyone nearby could hear that he was ordering the good stuff. Dean waited patiently. When the man finally moved away with his drink, Dean stepped forward. "What can I get you?" the bartender asked, already glancing past Dean to see if anyone more important was waiting. "Just water, please." The bartender served it without comment, without the performance he'd just given the champagne guy, then immediately shifted his attention to a more lucrative customer. Dean took the glass and stepped away, positioning himself near one of the marble columns that lined the room. From there, he had a clear view of the stage where Gerald and Patricia Hammond were holding court. Gerald was mid-story, gesturing expansively, making the small crowd around him laugh at something that probably wasn't that funny. Patricia stood slightly behind him, close enough to be part of the scene, but positioned so she could scan the room, monitoring who was watching, who was impressed, who mattered. Dean watched them. He'd done his research, of course. He knew Gerald's 3 previous films had all underperformed. He knew Patricia had been an actress before marrying Gerald, and that her career had stalled before it ever really started. He knew they'd leveraged everything for this deal, that they were betting their entire future on the assumption that his money would turn their ambition into achievement. What Dean didn't know yet was whether they had the character to deserve success. That's what tonight was really about. Not the celebration, not the deal, the character test. Because Dean had learned over decades in Hollywood that talent was common, but integrity was rare, and he refused to build empires with people who lacked it. Patricia Hammond was the first to notice him. She was scanning the room, cataloging guests, when her eyes landed on Dean standing alone by the marble column, holding a glass of water. wearing a perfectly nice suit that nonetheless didn't scream wealth or importance. He didn't look like he belonged. He wasn't networking. He wasn't laughing loudly. He wasn't doing any of the things people did at events like this to signal their status. Patricia leaned close to Gerald and whispered something. Gerald glanced over, saw Dean, and frowned slightly. Then he shrugged and turned back to his admirers. But Patricia kept watching. Her eyes narrowed. Something about Dean's presence bothered her. Not because she recognized him, but because she didn't, and that meant he was either nobody important or he was crashing. She excused herself from the stage and began making her way across the ballroom floor. She moved with purpose, her gold gown catching light, her emeralds glinting. She held her wine glass with the casual confidence of someone who'd never been told no in her life. Other guests stepped aside to let her pass. She was, after all, the woman of the hour. Dean saw her coming. He didn't move, didn't change his expression. He simply stood there, water glass in hand, waiting. Patricia stopped directly in front of him. She looked him up and down with undisguised judgment. Her smile was sharp, calculated, the kind of smile that wasn't really a smile at all. "You seem lost," she said. Her voice was loud enough that several nearby guests turned to watch. Dean said nothing. He met her eyes calmly, waiting to see where this would go. "This is a private event," Patricia continued, her tone sharpening. "Invitation only. Very exclusive." "I have an invitation," Dean said quietly. "Do you?" Patricia's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Because you don't exactly look like you belong here. No offense, but this crowd." She gestured around the ballroom. "These are Hollywood's finest. Producers, directors, stars, people who matter." A small crowd was forming now. Other guests sensing drama, sensing entertainment. Someone who didn't belong being put in their place by Patricia Hammond at her own party. This was the kind of moment people would talk about tomorrow. Dean still didn't react. He just stood there, utterly calm, utterly composed. Patricia's expression hardened. She wasn't getting the response she wanted. The embarrassment, the stammering apology, the retreat. Instead, this nobody was just standing there, looking at her with those steady, unreadable eyes, and it made her angry. "If you're here for work," she said, her voice cutting, "pretending to be a guest isn't clever. It's pathetic. There are professionals who wait tables at events like this. They don't try to mingle with the guests like they're equals." She extended her wine glass toward him. "Here, take this and move along. Make yourself useful." The crowd around them had grown larger. 20 people now, maybe more, all watching to see what would happen. Some of them looked uncomfortable. Most of them looked entertained. Dean looked at the extended wine glass. Then he looked back at Patricia. He didn't take the glass. He didn't move at all. "Take it," Patricia said again, her voice harder now. Dean's expression didn't change. "No, thank you." The words were polite, respectful even, but they were also a refusal, and Patricia Hammond didn't handle refusal well. Her face flushed, her jaw tightened. Around them, the crowd held its collective breath. "Listen to me very carefully," Patricia said, stepping closer. "I don't know who you think you are or how you got in here, but this is my night, my celebration, and I will not have it ruined by some nobody who can't follow basic social rules." She paused, letting the words sink in. Then she raised the wine glass higher. "This is your last chance. Take the glass, apologize, and leave." Dean met her eyes. He saw the anger there, the entitlement, the absolute certainty that she had the right to treat him this way because she was somebody and he was nobody. He saw all of it, and he made his decision. "I'm not taking the glass," he said quietly. Patricia's face transformed. All the practiced beauty, all the careful glamour, disappeared in an instant. What was left was something ugly, something cruel. "Fine," she said. And without another word, without hesitation, Patricia Hammond lifted the glass of Chateau Margaux 1961 and poured it directly over Dean Martin's head. The wine hit him in a stream of deep red. It soaked into his hair, ran down his forehead, dripped across his face. It splashed onto his white shirt, his dark suit jacket, his black tie. The smell of it filled the air, expensive and sharp. The wine kept coming until the glass was empty, and then Patricia lowered it, her expression triumphant. The ballroom froze. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. The jazz quartet's music faltered and died. 200 people turned to look. Gasps rippled through the crowd like waves. Someone said, "Oh my God." Someone else said, "Did she just do that?" A woman raised her phone and started recording. Dean stood absolutely still. Wine dripped from his hair, ran down his neck, soaked into his collar. He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Just one. Then he opened them again. He reached up slowly and wiped wine from his face with the back of his hand. He adjusted his jacket with careful deliberation. And then he looked at Patricia Hammond, not with anger, not with embarrassment, just with a quiet, unsettling composure that was somehow more frightening than rage would have been. Patricia was smiling, a huge, satisfied smile. She turned the crowd around her, basking in their shocked attention. Someone needed to handle that situation, she said loudly. Can't have just anyone wandering around our celebration. Gerald Hammond had pushed through the crowd now. He saw the wine. He saw Dean. His face went uncertain. "Patricia, what?" "It's fine." Patricia cut him off. "Just some crasher who needed to be dealt with. Security will handle the rest." Dean didn't wait for security. He set his water glass down on a nearby table with absolute precision. Then he turned and walked toward the ballroom doors. He didn't hurry, didn't run. He walked at exactly the same pace he'd walked in with. Steady, unhurried, dignified. The crowd parted for him. People stepped back, creating a path. As Dean passed, some of them looked away, embarrassed to meet his eyes. Others stared openly, trying to understand what had just happened. A few of them, the ones with better memories or sharper recognition skills, were starting to look concerned. One woman, a veteran casting director who'd worked with Dean on 3 films, put her hand over her mouth. "Oh no," she whispered. "Oh no, no, no." But her warning came too late. Dean walked out of the ballroom, down the grand staircase, through the marble lobby. He walked out the front doors of the Beverly Wilshire Hotel and into the cool October night. The air was crisp, clean. It felt good on his wine-soaked face. He stood there for a moment under the stars, under the streetlights, in the middle of Beverly Hills. He took a breath. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He made one call. It rang twice before someone picked up. "It's Dean," he said, his voice perfectly calm. "Cancel everything. The entire deal. Pull all funding immediately. Freeze all accounts associated with the Constellation Films partnership. And draft a termination notice. I want it sent to every board member, every investor, every stakeholder within the hour." The person on the other end said something. Dean listened. "No," he said quietly. "No second chances. No explanations. Just execute what I'm telling you. The deal is over. Constellation Films gets nothing. The $800 million partnership is dissolved effective immediately." He listened again. Because they failed a character test they didn't know they were taking. Dean said, "And I don't build empires with people like that." He ended the call and put the phone back in his pocket. Then he walked his car, got in, and drove away. Inside the Beverly Wilshire ballroom, the collapse happened with brutal efficiency. It started with the music. The jazz quartet was mid-song when their instruments suddenly cut out, not a gradual fade. An immediate electronic silence. The microphones went dead. The speakers went silent. The band leader looked confused, checked his equipment, found nothing wrong. Then the lights flickered. Not dramatically, just a brief flicker that made everyone look up at the chandeliers. Then the light stabilized, but something felt wrong. People couldn't quite name it, but the room felt different. Less celebratory, more uncertain. Gerald Hammond was back on stage. Tried to restart the energy when his assistant rushed up and whispered urgently in his ear. Gerald's face went pale. He looked at his phone. Then he looked at Patricia, who was back at his side, still smiling from her triumph over the presumed party crasher. "We need to talk," Gerald said quietly. "Now." They stepped to the side of the stage. Gerald showed Patricia his phone. She read the message there. Her smile disappeared. "That's impossible," she said. "The deal is done. The contracts are signed." "Read it again," Gerald said, his voice tight. Patricia read it again. The message was from their lawyer. 3 words: funding pulled, deal terminated. Around the ballroom, other people were getting similar messages. Executives checked their phones and went pale. Investors made urgent calls. Board members huddled together, speaking in low, panicked voices. The energy in the room was shifting fast, from celebration to confusion to something approaching panic. Then the main screen behind the stage, the one that had been displaying the Constellation Films logo all night, flickered. The logo disappeared. For a moment, there was nothing but blank whiteness. Then text appeared. Simple, clear, devastating. The partnership agreement between Constellation Films and Horizon Investment Group has been terminated effective immediately. All funding has been withdrawn. All contracts are void. There will be no further negotiation. The message stayed on the screen for exactly 10 seconds. Then the screen went dark. The room erupted, people shouting questions, phones ringing everywhere. Gerald Hammond stood frozen on the stage, his face gray. Patricia stood next to him, her emeralds suddenly looking garish, her gold gown looking cheap in the flickering chandelier light. A board member pushed through the crowd and grabbed Gerald's arm. "What the hell did you do?" he demanded. "Nothing," Gerald stammered. "We did nothing. The deal was solid. The investor never even showed up tonight. We were waiting for him to..." He stopped. His eyes went wide. "Patricia," he said slowly, "that man you poured wine on, who was he?" Patricia's face was already white. She knew. Somehow, in the second since the screen had gone dark, she'd figured it out. The way people in the crowd were looking at her. The way that casting director was backing away like Patricia carried a disease. A different board member, older, furious, stepped up to the stage. "Do you know who you humiliated?" he asked Patricia. His voice was shaking with anger. Patricia couldn't speak. "That was Dean Martin." The man continued. "Dean Martin. He owns Horizon Investment Group. He was the investor. He was the deal. And you poured wine on his head and told him he was a nobody." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Gerald Hammond sat down. Just sat right there on the stage, his legs giving out. Patricia stood frozen, her empty wine glass still in her hand. Around them, the ballroom was emptying fast. Investors leaving without saying goodbye. Executives making calls to distance themselves from the disaster. Actresses and producers and directors all suddenly remembering they had other places to be. Within 15 minutes, the grand ballroom of the Beverly Wilshire Hotel was nearly empty. Just Gerald and Patricia Hammond, standing in the ruins of their celebration, surrounded by abandoned champagne glasses and half-eaten appetizers, and the overwhelming weight of what they'd done. The video hit the internet before midnight. Someone had recorded the whole thing. Patricia approaching Dean. Patricia insulting him. Patricia pouring the wine over his head. Dean's calm, dignified exit. The video was clear. The audio was perfect. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. It was simply a document of one person publicly humiliating another person for no reason other than perceived superiority. By dawn, the video had been viewed 3 million times. By noon, 10 million. By the end of the second day, it had been shared by major news outlets, entertainment websites, and social media platforms around the world. Everyone was watching Patricia Hammond pour wine over Dean Martin's head. The headlines were brutal. Hollywood wife humiliates Dean Martin at gala, loses $800 million deal. Career suicide. Producer's wife mistakes Rat Pack legend for party crasher. Dean Martin walks away from massive partnership after wine incident. The most expensive glass of wine in Hollywood history. The backlash was immediate and merciless. Patricia Hammond became the most hated woman in Hollywood overnight. Not just for what she'd done to Dean Martin, but for what she represented. The arrogance, the cruelty, The absolute certainty that she had the right to treat someone as less than human based purely on appearance and assumption. Gerald Hammond tried to salvage something from the wreckage. He called Dean's representatives. He sent letters. He offered public apologies. He begged for a meeting. Every attempt was met with silence. Dean Martin had made his decision, and Dean Martin didn't reverse decisions made on matters of character. Constellation Films collapsed within a month. Without the $800 million partnership, they had nothing. No funding for their ambitious slate of films. No credibility with other investors. No way forward. The company that seemed destined for greatness dissolved like sugar in rain. Gerald lost everything. His production company, his reputation, his future in Hollywood. Other producers wouldn't take his calls. Studios wouldn't meet with him. He'd been marked as someone who'd been close to the biggest deal in Hollywood history and had lost it through sheer stupidity. Nobody wanted to be associated with that kind of failure. Patricia had it worse. She became a cautionary tale, a symbol of everything wrong with Hollywood arrogance. She couldn't go anywhere without being recognized, without people whispering, without reliving the worst moment of her life over and over. The emeralds went back to the jeweler. The gold dress went into storage. The life she'd built on beauty and calculation crumbled into nothing. 3 days after the incident, Gerald and Patricia Hammond drove up into the hills. They followed an address Dean's assistant had finally, reluctantly, provided. They begged for it, pleaded for just one chance to apologize in person, to explain, to somehow make it right. The house was beautiful but understated. Clean lines, native landscaping, the kind of place that spoke of success without screaming about it. Gerald and Patricia walked up the path to the front door with the hesitant steps of people approaching an execution. Patricia rang the bell. Her hands were shaking. Dean Martin answered the door himself. No staff, no assistants. Just Dean, wearing casual clothes, looking perfectly calm and unbothered. When he saw them, his expression didn't change. Mr. Martin, Patricia started, her voice breaking. We didn't know who you were. Dean looked at them for a long moment. He didn't invite them in, didn't step back to give them space. He just stood there in the doorway, waiting. We made a terrible mistake, Gerald said. If we'd known, if we'd realized, you would have treated me differently, Dean finished for him. They nodded eagerly. Dean's expression didn't soften. That's exactly the problem, he said quietly. You didn't care who I was. You saw someone you decided didn't matter, and you treated them accordingly. You humiliated someone you thought was powerless because you thought you could get away with it. It was a misunderstanding, Patricia whispered. Please, we'll do anything. We'll make a public apology. We'll... You already made a public apology, Dean interrupted. I saw it. You apologized for not recognizing me, for not knowing I was important. But you didn't apologize for the actual offense, for treating another human being with cruelty and contempt. He paused. Here's what you still don't understand. It wouldn't have mattered if I was an investor or a waiter or someone who'd wandered in off the street. What mattered was that I was a person, and you poured wine on me and tried to humiliate me because you thought you were better than me. That's what I can't forgive. Not the wine, the contempt. Gerald opened his mouth to respond, but Dean continued. In my world, respect isn't something you earn through status or appearance. It's something you give to everyone until they prove they don't deserve it. You proved you don't understand that. You proved that your first instinct when dealing with someone you perceive as beneath you is cruelty. And I don't build partnerships with people like that. I don't build anything with people like that. Please, Patricia said. Tears were running down her face now. We've lost everything. Yes, Dean said simply. You have. You could fix it, Gerald tried. One word from you, and investors will come back. The deal could. The deal is over, Dean said firmly. It's been over since the moment your wife poured wine on my head. Because in that moment, she showed me exactly who you both are. And who you are is not someone I want in my life or in my business. He stepped back and put his hand on the door. I hope you learn something from this, he said. I hope you learn that dignity matters more than status. That how you treat people when you think no one important is watching is the truest measure of character. That power without respect is just cruelty with resources. Mr. Martin, Patricia tried one more time. Dean looked at her, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with a kind of sad certainty. You call me a nobody, he said quietly. You treated me like garbage. You did it publicly, proudly, because you thought it would make you look powerful. And now you want me to save you from the consequences. But that's not how the world works. Not my world. He closed the door. Gerald and Patricia stood on the porch for a long moment. Then they walked back to their car. They drove down from the hills. And they drove into an uncertain future, carrying the lesson they'd learned too late. The story of Patricia Hammond pouring wine on Dean Martin became one of Hollywood's defining cautionary tales. It got told at parties, in boardrooms, in film schools. It became shorthand for hubris, for the dangers of judging people by appearance, for the catastrophic cost of treating others with contempt. But the real lesson, the one Dean Martin understood from the beginning, was simpler than all of that. Respect is not negotiable. Dignity is not conditional. And how you treat people when you think it doesn't matter is exactly when it matters most. Dean Martin never spoke publicly about the incident. He didn't need to. The story spoke for itself. The video spoke for itself. The empty ballroom and the collapsed company and the destroyed careers all spoke for themselves. What Dean did instead was continue building his empire, continue making his investments, continue choosing his partners based on character first and credential second. He continued treating everyone with the same calm respect, whether they were studio heads or waiters or security guards who mistook him for catering staff. Because that's who Dean Martin was. Not the persona. Not the smooth-talking Rat Pack member. Not the Vegas headliner. The real Dean Martin. The son of an Italian immigrant who'd never forgotten what it felt like to be dismissed. Who'd never forgotten what it felt like to be treated as less than. Who'd built his success on talent and hard work, and then used that success to ensure he never treated others the way he'd been treated. October 18th, 1968. The night Patricia Hammond poured wine on Dean Martin's head. The night an $800 million deal collapsed in minutes. The night Hollywood learned that some insults are too expensive to forgive. The night that proved respect and dignity matter more than money or status or power. That's a lesson worth remembering.